And we welcome you inside Joe Goodman's Free Agent War Room. Barry Jackson with you as we embark on NBA free agency. We're 36 hours in, Joe. The good news is it looks like LeBron and Bosh and Wade will be coming back. Certainly, LeBron appears very likely at this point. Bosh has told people he's coming back. Wade is coming back as well. That's the good news.
I'm coming back.
You're coming back as well. That's
Barry's
also
coming
good
back.
news.
This is the
bad news.
Joey and the Hornet are coming back.
The bad news is that the market is flooded with money in terms of teams having a lot of cap space and not a lot of great free agents to spend it on. So what we've seen in the first 36 hours of free agency is Jody Meeks. Are you kidding me? Jody Meeks getting $19 million for 3 years from Detroit.
Is he in the NBA? Did he play for Kentucky, right? Or something like that?
A competent three-point shooter, but at $19 million over 3, you have to question that. We've seen Avery Bradley get 32 over 4. So this makes you wonder what exactly is Pat Riley going to be able to afford, even with some cap space, to upgrade this team. Have you had that thought?
Vince Carter and a bag of potato chips.
Well,
that is what the Heat are now trying to get. I have it on confirmation from multiple sources that it is a bag of potato chips and Vince Carter.
You know what's funny about that? Even players that they thought they might be able to get at the minimum, like a Vince Carter or Sean Marion, some of that ilk might end up costing more than that. Marvin Williams, you thought maybe he'd be able to be obtainable at the minimum. He's probably going to end up more than that as well. So this puts Riley in a bind. I guess the options right now are, do you use the cap space you have, which could end up being in the $8 million range, perhaps a little bit more.
Wait, hold on. Before you talk numbers.
Joe tabulating his cap space as we speak.
Let me tabulate the cap. This is a very useful tool here. We had the, $8 million. That's how many zeros?
Well, they could end up having about $8 million in space, perhaps a little bit more than that, perhaps 10. But the question is, if you're Pat Riley, do you want to use all of that money on one player? If you can get maybe a Pau Gasol or Kyle Lowry. Lowry, of course, is being wined and dined by Houston and Toronto. He very much likes the Raptors. Nobody would be shocked if he resigns.
Check the Twitter machine here.
Joe checking Twitter as we speak. Or do you instead opt to go the route of using your salary cap exceptions? You can get one player for $5.3 million. You can use your trade exception for $2.2 million. You can use the biannual exception for $2 million. Obviously, you wouldn't be getting huge names. You wouldn't be getting elite free agents with that money, but you would be supplementing your depth. Who on the market, if I could take you away from your calculator for a minute, who on the market appeals to you besides Vince Carter? Because we know Carter is being pursued by a lot of teams, the Heat among them, but he likes Dallas very much and might resign there. Who else appeals to you? Joe Goodman.
Someone who can defeat the Spurs in the NBA Finals. Someone who can contribute a positive impact, preferably in the low post, rebound a few rebounds. Who could that be? Who could that be? He's a Spaniard.
Pau Gasol.
He comes from Spain.
I like your hints. Well, Gasol and Riley spoke yesterday, as was reported by Yahoo Sports. So there's certainly that possibility. Gasol looking for money in the 10 to 12 million range. Not sure Miami's going to be able to get there unless they trade Norris Cole, which would free another $2 million, or unless Bosh is willing to accept a deal starting at less than $15 million, which we have doubts about. We know Bosh and Wade are taking pay cuts. The question is, how low do they go? We saw that report in the Oregonian yesterday.
And why don't we address that real quick now? Because I have on my Freedom Agency wristbands, and I think we need to address the freedom of free agency liberties taking place right now in the Twitter world. And Barry, explain to us how a report comes about that Chris Bosh, who's worth, probably $25 million, but they can't pay him that much. They can only pay him $20. How is Chris Bosh, the great three-point shooter that he is, the great most important player on the Miami Heat for the past 4 years, according to Grazing the Grass, Eric Spoelstra, how is he only worth $11 million, according to your report? How does that happen?
We both were skeptical of that, as were others, based on what we've heard.
But
Chris Bosh is not a guy who's going to be starting $11 million a year. His agent denied that report, calling it BS. I think a more realistic number for Bosh probably would be $14, $15 million starting at that number. But if you start at that number,
in the Heat's dreams.
If you start at that number...
That's the perfect dream scenario.
Well, there'd be the 7.5% permitted annual raises if you start him at $15 million. But the question is, if you start Bosh at 15 and Wade at 12 or 13, you're not going to achieve more than $8 million or so in cap space. And then you're in a spot where how are you going to get one of these high-end free agents like a Gasol or a Lowry that's going to be awfully difficult to do? So then maybe you use your exception money instead. Give me other names that appeal to you. Marvin Williams, does he do anything for you?
I think what they're going to do is they're going to offer Paul Gasol $5.3 million and 12 cruises. Probably.
Yeah, I'm sure Riley will gladly offer his mid-level exception if he chooses to go that route rather than cap space to Gasol and Lowry and other players. But the question is, what's their motivation to do it when there are so many teams with cap space who can pay him more, some of which are playoff contenders, like Dallas?
Yeah, the motivation is to win now. That's the motivation. It's championships versus money. That is basically the Heat's pitch in a nutshell. And it worked with Ray Allen. It worked with Shane Battier. It worked with Chris Anderson. Birdman is a special case scenario because he was down and out in the NBA and he needed someone to give him a shot. And he came back because he felt like, well, these guys did a solid by me, so I'm going to come and play for basically a bag of peanuts this season. Shane Battier he came to the Heat because he was able to parlay that into a now career at ESPN.
Right. And Ray Allen had won before.
Ray Allen wanted to stick one to the Boston Celtics, so he turned down $9 million and came to the Miami Heat. Now they want to find someone to sharpen the swords. Eric Spoelstra reference.
Exactly.
They want to sharpen the swords this offseason. Who's that going to be? Who's the pitch? Who wants to win more championships, take less money? That's the big question.
Perhaps you look at restricted free agents. Isaiah Thomas of Sacramento has been mentioned. The problem with making an offer for one of those players, though, is that it ties up your cap space for several days.
Freedom agency is making me sweaty.
And as a result, you're not going to be able to do other things if you have an offer out to a restricted free agent. If you hear skepticism in my voice, maybe there's a little, just because the market just has so much money and yet so few high-end free agents. Now, all that being said, never bet against Pat Riley because he's proven consistently every summer, except for last summer, that he's been able to get impact free agents to come in and help. One thing to keep in mind, you mentioned Birdman, you mentioned Ray Allen. If the Heat decides not to use cap space but instead use their three exceptions, then they would maintain their bird rights for Birdman and Allen.
Rights for bird rights.
A little ironic, which would mean that the Heat could give those players slight raises.
Yeah, that's a little freedom agency humor.
Without having to use their exceptions. You couldn't do that if you use cap space because in that scenario you would have to renounce all of those players. So Ray Allen made $3.1 million last year. You could pay him 3.4, 3.5 if he wants that, if the Heat wants him to, if you maintain his bird rights. And you maintain his bird rights, obviously, by not using cap space, but instead using your exceptions. You could do the same with Chris Anderson.
I come up with a figure:
$1.4 million.
$95,846,529.
A little overpaid for Ray Allen, although we like him. So we'll see what unfolds in free agency in the coming days.
Explain to me what a tax apron is at $81 million, Barry, and how does that play into the Heat's plans going forward? That is one scenario, is it not?
Well,
Please explain to me what a tax apron is at $81 million.
Is a range up to $4 million over the luxury tax threshold.
And what is the projected luxury tax
Well, it's
threshold?
not going to be an issue for the Heat this summer because they're either going to be a cap team or they're going to be a team operating slightly over the cap, but not in luxury tax range in all likelihood. Closing thoughts before we wrap this up.
Closing thoughts are, it is a very volatile market this season. Over the next week, you're going to see many, many outrageous reports, and probably you should believe none of them. In the end, I think the Heat is going to go with veteran players who want to trade money for championships, Vince Carter and a bag of potato chips.
And I'm sure Riley's going to get players. He always does every year. The question is he going to be able to get high-end players? We'll know.
What does that sound?
I don't know.
What does that sound?
We'll know in the coming days. For Joe Goodman, Barry Jackson, thanks for being with us.